Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to trace the rapid, honestly spectacular evolution of ship engineering from 1805 all the way to 1901. But look, we aren't just going to stare at blueprints here. We're anchoring these massive technological shifts to the grueling everyday reality of the actual people living and fighting aboard these vessels. Because while this was a century where humanity literally conquered the oceans, it came at a pretty horrifying human cost.
Here's our roadmap. We'll be looking at the age of sail and blood, the great T-clippers, iron, steam, and ocean liners, the ultimate iron deterrent, and finally, conquering the frozen frontier. We're going to look at 5 legendary ships, and you'll see how every new vessel was this brilliant engineering answer to the limitations of the last one, even while life at sea remained persistently brutal.
All right, part 1, Age of Sail and Blood. We're looking at HMS Victory and the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. Let's step right onto the bloody, smoke-filled wooden hulls of Nelson's Navy.
Now on paper, the combined French and Spanish fleet had this massive advantage, an impressive 33 battleships compared to British Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson's 27. Usually, navies back then fought in long, parallel lines to avoid chaos. But Nelson, he was incredibly confident in his crews. He relied on these shockingly aggressive tactics, deliberately dividing his fleet like daggers to force a chaotic, absolutely decisive melee.
To stiffen the resolve of his 800-man crew, Nelson signaled that iconic message: England expects that every man shall do his duty. But there was a catch to this aggressive tactic. His flagship, HMS Victory, had to sail head-on toward the enemy. That meant taking a terrifying, blistering pounding for 45 minutes straight from French broadsides before she could even turn around to fire back.
And this perfectly illustrates the horrifying artillery power of HMS Victory once she finally broke the enemy line. We're talking about 3-ton beasts that were sometimes double or even triple loaded for that first broadside. Victory sent around a massive ton of solid iron flying at point-blank range right into the French flagship. The reality down on those gun decks is almost unimaginable. Deafening noise, blinding smoke, and wooden walls splintering everywhere, basically turning enemy gun decks into a mush of shattered body parts. When these giant wooden ships eventually entangled, the battle became intimately violent. Boarding parties resorted to brutal hand-to-hand combat using a really vicious close-quarters arsenal. Cutlasses for rapid parrying and slashing, flintlock sea service pistols that were fired at point-blank range and then, get this, simply flipped around to be used as heavy clubs. The French were even hurling heavy iron hand grenades straight down from the rigging. This horrifying proximity to violence led to an 85% casualty rate on the French ship Redoutable in just one single hour. Okay, part 2, the great T-clippers, specifically the Cutty Sark in 1869. Let's see how this builds into the era of global trade, where securing the first tea harvest from China gave birth to this incredibly fast vessel. So, in the Victorian tea trade, speed was literally money. To hit top speeds of 17.5 knots, the Cutty Sark relied on a razor-sharp hull and an astonishing 11 miles of rigging supporting 32 sails. Just think about the human element for a second. Controlling that canvas meant crewmen had to scurry up 150-foot masts, often in freezing, tempestuous seas, leaning way out over the yardarms to stow wet, heavy sails entirely by hand. No thanks. But, engineering waits for absolutely no one. Her dominance in the tea trade was cut drastically short. Why? Because the Suez Canal opened the exact same year she was built. Steamships could just chug right through the canal, but sailing clippers couldn't navigate its winds. So, rendered obsolete for tea, she was forced into the perilous, storm-whipped Australian wool trade, diving deep into the dangerous Roaring Forties just to stay profitable.
Moving on to Part 3, Iron, Steam, and Ocean Liners. The SS Great Britain, 1843. Here we see a monumental leap from wood and wind straight into iron and steam with Isambard Kingdom Brunel's first great ocean liner. Now, despite the SS Great Britain being this absolute engineering marvel capable of crossing the globe, the grueling human experience aboard was dictated entirely by your wallet. If you shelled out 70 pounds for first class, you were on a 19th century luxury cruise. Roast meats, cognac, even playing cricket on the deck. But if you paid just 15 guineas for steerage, you were spending 3 months in the dark, cramped bowels of the ship, dealing with rats in your bed, overflowing communal toilets, and just rampant theft.
And that suffering wasn't just limited to the poor passengers. While the first-class folks socialized up top, stokers down in the belly of the ship were working grueling 4-hour shifts in a blistering 1,200 degrees Celsius. They were shoveling tons of coal to keep those massive V-shaped steam engines beating, effectively operating in what was literally a floating furnace.
And surviving the journey? Well, that meant surviving the food too. With zero fresh provisions on a 3-month voyage to Australia, steerage passengers relied on this terrible, starchy diet that was actually mandated by law. We're talking multi-year-old ship's biscuits that were practically rock hard and dense, wildly unappetizing puddings called plum duff. To cope with the awful diet and just the sheer boredom of it all, passengers basically passed the time with heavy drinking and relentless gambling.
Next up, Part 4, the ultimate iron deterrent. HMS Warrior, 1860. All this new iron and steam technology quickly triggered an international naval arms race. Britain and France were constantly trying to out-engineer each other, and that birthed the colossal HMS Warrior.
This unbelievable ship was 3 times the length of Nelson's HMS Victory. She had iron sides that absolutely no cannon of the era could penetrate, and housed the biggest maritime engine ever built at the time. Pumping out 4,000 horsepower, she was a 14.5-knot iron beast that could completely ignore the wind and weather.
So with that staggering cost, the massive armor, and those devastating 68-pounder guns, it's totally natural to wonder, what kind of destruction did this thing actually unleash upon Britain's enemies? What great battles define her legacy?
Well, the answer is zero. Absolutely none. She never fired a single shot in anger. She was basically just a massive, floating PR tool used to deter the French and the Americans. But she kicked off an arms race that was so incredibly rapid, thicker armor and bigger guns were being developed almost yearly. Within 10 years, she was outdated. Within 20, completely obsolete, relegated to being a floating classroom and an oil pontoon.
But the truly revolutionary thing about the Warrior wasn't actually the iron armor. It was that the Navy finally realized they had to treat their technically skilled sailors as valuable assets. I mean, you couldn't just kidnap men and force them to run a complex steam engine, right? So the Warrior featured unprecedented amenities to keep men healthy and happy. They had steam-powered washing machines for their clothes, and a heated, brightly lit sickbay that was a whole world away from those bloody surgical decks of Trafalgar.
Finally, Part 5, Conquering the Frozen Frontier, RRS Discovery, 1901. Let's look at how all this maritime technology culminated in the very first purpose-built Antarctic research vessel, meant to take explorers into the absolute unknown.
Venturing into the ice took some serious, genius problem-solving. To prevent frozen fresh water from expanding and literally cracking the ship's timbers apart from the inside out, engineers filled the hull with rock salt. By turning any leaking water into an unfreezable, highly salty brine, they effectively pickled the ship. And that's exactly why over 90% of our original wooden hull miraculously survives today.
But pushing through that thick Antarctic pack ice, that required immense power. RRS Discovery's steam engines burned through 6 tons of coal every single day. And since they were heading into a frozen wasteland with 0 resupply points, a staggering 3-year supply of coal had to be crammed into every spare inch of the vessel, which drastically reduced the living space for the crew.
And even with all that incredible engineering progress by 1901, the human experience was still just agonizing. Legendary explorers like Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton endured horrific sub-zero isolation. When they parked in the ice, they deactivated the boilers to save coal, which meant there was 0 central heating on board. Scott's cabin shared a wall with that freezing metal boiler room. He literally sat at his desk wearing full Arctic gear, his feet shoved into a box of furnace stuffing, just to avoid frostbite while mapping the Great White South.
These engineering marvels totally shaped our modern world, pushing the absolute boundaries of what humanity could achieve. But it was the grit, the blood, and the immense suffering of the sailors that truly powered them. Looking back at this century of spectacular progress, it leaves us with one big question. Which of these legendary, brutal ships would you have dared to board? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.